good evening, and welcome everyone to Let's Just Talk with Kim. And of course, I am Kim, and I'm so excited to be here this evening. Make sure you like, make sure you share, make sure you set your alert buttons so you always know that I'm here on every Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And tonight I have a phenomenal guest today. His name is I was getting ready to call you Doctor
Oh,
David Fialko. David Fialko, and we're going to talk about marijuana, cannabis, and CBD oils or products that show the real effect of those products. And sometimes there's so many myths that are not accurate, and he's come to educate us thoroughly on these products. So, David, could you just tell the people a little bit about you so they understand where your position and why you're so knowledgeable?
yeah. So I've been working in the field of public health and addiction sciences for over 20 years now. Um, that ranges from entering the field, working with adolescents who were adjudicated. Um, Started working with young people who were living in long-term housing for minors who were, in the criminal justice system. And you saw a lot of co-occurring. Back then, we used to call dual diagnosis. In other words, they
Mm,
had a mental health diagnosis and a substance use diagnosis. Now we call that co-occurring. In other words, that different diagnoses occur at the same time, and some may be more prominent than others. And from there, that was out west in Colorado, and when I moved back east here, I moved to the adult population, working in mental health facilities for adult populations. And again, you saw a lot of co-occurring disorders. So it becomes kind of the chicken or the egg, which causes which. Was the mental health diagnosis undiagnosed, and the person started using substances to self-medicate for those symptoms that they were experiencing, or were they using substances and the mental health symptoms started to surface. So from mental health, moved to drug and alcohol treatment, worked with adult populations, ages 18 to 30, specialized in outpatient, intensive outpatient, and medicated assisted treatment facilities for several years. And then moved to prevention, where I took some of the knowledge that I learned over the years of providing counseling services to these individuals who are experiencing substance use disorders, and applied it to educating other professionals, community members, families, schools. I do a lot with the schools, a lot of faculty trainings, a lot of, and I still see students who are referred through the student assistance program for the organization which I work for, the Council of Southeast Pennsylvania. And that's done through what's called the Student Assistance Program, which is
mm,
a state mandate. It's actually something that most schools are required to have in some level. Um, and that just means that young people who are experiencing issues with cannabis or marijuana or any other substance have the ability to get supports that can, help them contemplate whether that's a behavior that they would like to continue. And so that's where I am now. I work for a nonprofit agency here in Doylestown, and we're very proud of the work that we do.
I'm sure it must be very rewarding to really help youth and adults get on the right path when it comes to using substances. And also, you mentioned about behavioral health. Like that's a fine line when you think about it. Is it being produced from a clinical level or like something? I guess it would be like a chemical imbalance within you as far as from about behavioral health, or is it because of the substances that you've used that now have caused different deteriorations, I guess, in the brain? So I wanted to really start off with marijuana. You did an excellent talk, and that's why I have you here today, just to share a little bit of your knowledge and the kind of debunk the myths that's out there on how it can benefit you, because some people feel there's a strong benefit. And I know there are some times where they are used for medical purposes, but I really wanted you just to share all about that.
Yeah. So, if there's no specific questions, I can kind of touch on that, I guess.
Yes.
So essentially, we do not have any longitudinal uh, data or medical confirmation that it actually you know it is a medicine that has outcomes. All right, so we've
Mm,
never really studied it over a long period of time and said we can correlate the use of marijuana for this diagnosis, and these are the results that we get. It's essentially assumed that there's, and we believe that there is medical benefit uh, to use marijuana for some diagnoses. However, for others, it can be actually counterproductive. So there's this thing called titration, which is quite concerning with the way that marijuana is distributed right now in the medical form that Pennsylvania has acquired to follow the guidelines through the Department of Health medical marijuana website. And I might add, I'm here on my own accord. This is not, I'm not representing the council today.
right,
Um,
right.
so, the guidelines stipulate that if you have one of these 23 diagnoses, I believe it's now 24, 25,
Mm,
um, that you meet the requirements for medical marijuana prescription.
mm,
And so the doctor
mm,
just simply confirms that you have one of these, and then he or she writes a prescription for medical marijuana, stating this person meets the requirements per Department of Health and medical marijuana guidelines. And you take that prescription to the medical marijuana dispensary, where you meet with either a nurse practitioner or a medical doctor, and that person kind of gives you a walkthrough of some of the assumptions as far as how medical marijuana may benefit that person, and then they
mm,
introduce them to the floor of the dispensary, and that's where they interact with the behind the counter help. They refer to themselves as bud tenders. And which I find interesting. We have bartenders, um,
mhm,
but we have bud tenders in a medical dispensary. So it's almost kind of, right there, there's kind of a little red flag. And
right.
these individuals really require nothing more than a high school equivalency. And then
Wow.
they need to take a short, 2 to 3 week tops online course regarding, marijuana, whether, the different strains, the CBDs versus THCs, how those varying strains can solicit different outcomes or results from using it. And then unfortunately, this person can give medical advice, and the
Mm,
problem with that is somebody who is taking a week or two online course really shouldn't be giving medical advice. The
right.
only person who should be giving medical advice are medical doctors. I do not give medical advice. I give public health recommendations. And typically it follows the same guidelines that medical staff follow, which is do no harm, and
Right.
where you look at the risk and the benefit and you weigh it. And if the potential risks outweigh the benefit, then you might want to look to something else. So we see the titration come into effect because this is a plant, and indeed it is a drug, just as all of our drugs come from plants. Cocaine from the coca plant, heroin from the poppy plant, um, you know, nicotine from the tobacco plant, and marijuana from the cannabis plant, whether it's a sativa or an indica, or a hybrid, it's a sensibilia. Um, they all come from plants. So the whole argument that it's not a drug, it's just a plant, it's kind of out the window. All of our drugs come
Right.
from.
Right.
And when we look at titration, everybody's going to be different, especially that the way of dose response is going to be. So we don't have any long-term studies as far as this dose
Mhm.
qualifies this individual at this rate with these predispositions. This should be the dose. These are the other medications that the person is taking. These are the things that we should consider when prescribing this. All of that's out the window. None of that is
Mm,
followed. It's just basically, here you go. And this is what we recommend. um,
Wow.
for anxiety, and anxiety is the number one reason for uh, medical marijuana cards being issued in Pennsylvania. So
Really?
yes,
Wow.
and um, and unfortunately, it's counterproductive for anxiety when used
Mm.
in the long term. Any type of anti-anxiety medication, whether it's a benzodiazepine or anything else that's FDA approved and recognized, is typically recommended by the World Health Organization for no longer than 4 to 6 weeks, with a maximum of around 8 to 9 weeks. And the idea with that is to allow a person to take this medication, which reduces the perceived anxiety that they're experiencing by adjusting the chemicals in their brain, whether that's selective serotonin or dopamine, um, and allowing them to feel reduced anxiety so that they can actually address the problems or the issues that are underlying, that are causing the stress. As that
Mhm.
person is going through counseling and life management, whether that's through cognitive behavioral therapy or psychotherapy or whatever routes that they choose, and cognitive behavioral therapy tends to be most effective for anxiety disorders when using a benzodiazepine. That person starts to see results, and
Okay.
and they're adjusting their lives in order to adjust their response to a stressful situation. As they're doing so, the doctor is reducing that benzodiazepine dose until they're no longer on it. And then
Mm.
that person comes off of the benzodiazepine and they feel that they can address the things that were once stressful to them in a more baseline or normalized, I don't like using that word, but a way that individuals perceive that situation. So if we could do that with marijuana, cool, great. Unfortunately, that's not being done.
Right.
And everybody's titration or starting dose or effective dose is different. No other medication is smoked. When the medical marijuana um, um, program was started, there was no smokable form for that very reason.
Mhm.
You have
Mhm.
titration and health risks associated with inhaling heat and smoke and tar and all of the other byproducts, regarding nameless to herbicides, pesticides, fungicides. You know, again, we don't smoke medications. Um, Unfortunately, after a couple of years of implementation, the Secretary of Health decided that it was their best interest to instill smoking form. And the reason behind that was because they claimed that it was more cost effective, that the oil-based products, hash oils, and things like butter and crumble and tinctures were
Mm.
cost prohibitive to individuals, which is not actually accurate. Because the flowering material or the smokable form is less expensive, but it's also less potent.
Mm.
So, a gram of flowering material is not the same as a vaping device filled with hash oil.
So
But
just to interrupt really just to make sure everybody understands. So when you say flowering material,
yeah,
that's the actual broke when you crush up the I guess the marijuana leaf. Is that
yeah,
what you mean by flower? Okay.
yeah. It's when the plant turns to flowering mode and produces the
Okay.
bud,
Mhm.
and like the marijuana bud, um,
Mhm.
and so because the flowering material is less potent, you're going to need more of it, which brings the cost up equivalent with the
Mhm.
hash oil.
Mhm.
Really, it's just preference. Some people prefer the flowering material because it is, it's less expensive and it provides a less intense high. However, the cards can be titrated to where you can calculate how much you need. So the
Mhm.
flowering material being used as a medication is concerning. We do not smoke
Right.
any other medication.
Right, right, right. And that's interesting because it sounds like what you're saying is there's no real clinical
No.
um monitoring of this. It's just someone who took a course, got a certificate, and now they're distributing marijuana in these centers. Is
Yeah.
what you're saying? Yeah.
Yep.
So
And,
it's
and
this.
and there's some priority populations that we have great concerns about. We all know the
Mhm.
outcomes of alcohol exposure in utero. Those are called fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, which
Mm-hmm.
can vary from very, minimal to very profound on the spectrum. When we look at, marijuana exposure in utero, we have no long-term data.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
it's been an illicit substance. We don't have
Mm-hmm.
research. You can't study an illicit substance the
Right.
same way that you can study something that is either regulated through the FDA or is accepted and legal. But now we're
Mm-hmm.
starting those, but it's not. We're not going to see the outcomes for another 5 to 10 to 15 years. We do know that cannabis and all of its cannabinoids, it's not just THC that we're concerned about, but all of the cannabinoids do cross the blood-brain barrier as well as the placental. Anything that after the embryo is adhered to the uterine wall, that around week 2 of pregnancy, that embryo, that developing fetus, now takes on everything that is ingested or smoked. Um,
Wow.
by that mother. And so we have concerns about developing regions of the brain that are responsible for dopamine regulation and serotonin
Mm.
regulation. How are those things forming and developing in utero, as well as past utero, where the mother is now breastfeeding, and marijuana does transfer into breast milk. And so there are dispensaries that are giving um, pregnant mothers marijuana with the with the claims and assumptions that it helps with morning sickness. Does
Mm.
it? Yes, it probably does. But there was also, a drug in the 1960s called um, uh, um, um, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank. It was a morning sickness drug,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a teratogen, and it actually resulted in cognitive and physical birth defects in the
My
offspring.
gosh.
And thankfully, the U.S. caught it very quickly. Other developing countries were not so quick to catch it. Yeah, so again, before we start giving pregnant populations an untested, long-term longitudinal study outcome drug, we really should pull the reins back. I'm not saying that
It's
there's not benefits,
right. Mm-hmm.
but without knowing the exact risks, we can't
Right.
follow the do no harm pledge that medical providers take. If you don't know the true harm or risk, how can you then weigh the benefit and the risk together?
That is crazy because the fact that we're distributing these under a medical marijuana, just using the word medical, would give a perception of more safety than, doing it from getting marijuana from the street or anything like that. That you are a professional who knows the dosage that I should have, the effects that will happen to me, just because you put that medical piece on there. Everyone is just going to assume that it's safer than any other marijuana, where what you're saying is not. It's not safe at all. And the fact that we don't have any risk factors to qualify using this drug is astonishing to me, that you would then turn around and do it, but it makes sense why it isn't. One of the things that you mentioned a couple of times was the THC and the CBD. What's the difference in those 2?
Well, they're both cannabinoids.
Mhm.
CBD is actually a blocker of THC. So CBD actually does not provide any type of euphoric effect. And CBD actually blocks what we call the receptor sites, or
Mhm.
the areas that catch the neurotransmitters that are produced by THC. Um,
Mhm.
and we call them cannabinoid receptors, but they're actually anandamide receptors, which is what the neurotransmitter was originally called, but we kind of fashioned it. We discovered that THC hijacks the anandamide system, and so we started calling them cannabinoid receptors and
Mhm.
cannabinoid
Mhm.
system. Um, so CBD actually blocks the THC from becoming having its active reaction. So the marijuana that previous generations have experimented with, and many of us have, from the 70s and 60s, 70s, and 80s, and into the 90s. We turned out fine, our generation, completely different plant material. All right, completely
Mhm.
different. Maximum THC content was around 3.5 to maybe 7% for the very high quality marijuana that was circulated, on occasion. But the average was about 3.5% by volume THC. Of that flowering material, of those dime bags and bud material that
Mhm.
um, excuse me, consumed in the 80s, it had an equal amount of CBD, so about a 3% to 3.5% CBD content. So they would work against each other and never make that person feel too euphoric. Um,
Okay.
so the marijuana that was circulated in the 80s and 90s and even the 70s and 60s, five people might smoke it, you laugh for 20, 30 minutes, and then it kind of passes. That's not the case with the marijuana of today. The average flowering material is around 15%,
Wow.
nationwide. Actually, I believe it's 17% now. But that is the average. When we look at retailers, whether they're medicinal or for adult consumption, which we call adult use, I don't like to
Mhm.
call it recreational, you can see flowering material as high as 31%. Uh, and when you look at these, whether it's medical or recreational, there's essentially no CBD in it. You can log on to
Mhm.
any, a dispensary website and look at their products, the menu, and it tells you the THC content and then the CBD content. And most of these are going to have CBD contents of less than 1%. So now the kind of balancing act of that CBD is taken out of the picture, and that person is getting the full brunt effect of a very high potency THC product, which
Mhm.
is causing a higher level of dependency amongst its users. And I don't like to use the word addiction. Dependency, I feel, is more appropriate. And that person now begins to use that substance at an escalated rate, throughout time, and unfortunately sometimes uses it in order to cope with interactions in their daily life or to meet their baseline mood. And that can become problematic. So, I'm not trying to compare it to, cocaine or crack cocaine or heroin. I'm
Right.
just looking at it that it is a plant, but it is also a drug, and it can
Right.
impact overall health and wellness. Yeah.
And a
So,
lot of people say that they
yeah.
use it to manage their life, like they feel
Yeah.
more. I've heard that they feel more energetic, they feel like they can focus more, they can do more, but it's really causing more harm than it is a benefit to them.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. The two main drugs that, or endogenous drugs, endo meaning from within, our neurotransmitters are going to be dopamine and serotonin, which regulate our pleasure and our ability to cope with anxiety. Serotonin is kind of our drug that allows us to address anxiety. And dopamine is our kind of reward chemical for engaging in things that require skill and effort. And we have a baseline. Every morning we wake up and we have a baseline of those drugs to where they're just kind of trickled in to where we feel neutral. All right.
Hmm.
And throughout the day, we have opportunities to engage in conversations and, cultural, whether that's art, music, academics, and then, physical activity and sports. And each one of those things have a varying reward or amount of dopamine that is given to the individual via the reward portion of the brain, which we know is the nucleus accumbens, and the limbic system. And, you know, conversations, jokes, about a 5% increase from baseline. Academics, music, arts, culture, about a 15%, and sports are about a 25% increase in dopamine. And they're very short acting. The brain rewards a person, gives them a small dose of this dopamine, and it lasts a few seconds and it feels amazing. And that's why
Hmm.
when people like play sports and activities, physical activities is the number one way. And that's why when we're engaging in sports, we just kind of think about the sport. We're not thinking about, spouses, work, school, teachers, social anxiety. We're focused on the game because we are actually engaging in drug seeking behavior, but this is a healthy pro-social drug seeking behavior. This is one that results in just a very small release of dopamine
Hmm.
that lasts a few seconds and then it's gone. So when somebody makes a basket or hits a home run or makes a play or whatever, the brain is like, here, oh, nice job. Here's a little dopamine. And you're like, wow, that's amazing. And then it's gone. And then you're like, your brain hooked you some more. That feels amazing. And the brain's like, no, no, things are free. You have to work for it. Get back
Right.
out there and do that again. Just don't do it again. Do it better. And we get that even from conversations. Like when you meet somebody and you have an amazing conversation, that's dopamine. If you
Mm.
meet somebody and there's nothing there, and there's no reaction, it's like talking to a wall. You don't continue talking to that person because we're drug seeking individuals. We move on to somebody else and look for somebody who's going to have a meaningful dialogue and get some dopamine, right? And that's
Hmm.
how friendships and trust and love is formed. Um,
Wow.
so marijuana kind of hijacks that, and it
Mm.
tells the brain, the limbic system, the nucleus accumbens specifically, to release an abnormally large amount of dopamine, anywhere from 100 to
Mm.
150% increase in dopamine, floods the synapse or those receptor sites, and it lasts for anywhere from an hour to 3 hours.
Mm.
And that person not only feels happy, but they feel euphoric. And so now what can happen is that individual experiences the long acting euphoric response that requires no skill, no effort, and lasts a long time. And unfortunately, the brain remembers that. And if given the choice in the future, sometimes the brain is 3.5 pound organ, wants to get from point A to point B in the least amount of work necessary. If they're given the option of, you know, um, engage in this activity, which requires a lot of skill and effort, only gives you a little bit of the dopamine that only lasts for a short few seconds, or do I engage in this activity that requires no skill or effort, gives you a lot of dopamine and lasts for a long time, which is the brain going to turn to? And that's the premise which all substance use disorders start at, is maladjusted response to stressful situations, or situations that allow for a euphoric response. So that's kind of
Wow.
how THC hijacks the dopamine region. CBD does not do that.
Hmm.
Um, we don't really know everything we really need to know about CBD. We believe there are some benefits to it medically. I believe that the plant, the marijuana plant, does carry medicinal value. I just I don't think it's a, and this is just my opinion. I don't think we're doing a service right now. I believe we're doing a disservice, and we're
Right.
being quite irresponsible in dispensing it the way we're dispensing it. No other drug is done this way. No other
Mm.
medical drug is dispensed this way at all. Imagine if you could go and get, you know, other drugs the same way that you get this.
Mm.
Wouldn't happen. No limit. You can buy as much as you want. It's so yeah, it's concerning.
And for when it comes to regular drugs, we look at the risk factors. Like that makes a decision whether or not you want to get a certain drug. Like I remember one drug that was recommended to me, and it was a high risk of thyroid cancer. Even if it was in another family member, you were sure you were at a higher risk of getting thyroid cancer. And that, because cancer runs so strongly in my family, I was like, oh no, that's too much of a risk with me. And that's not something that you would be able to do with doing marijuana, going to
Yeah.
one of those marijuana distributors, which is extremely concerning because the risk that you had just explained about the dopamine, like that's why I would imagine people go after that feeling and continue to use it because of the brains liking it and not having to work for it, as you explained. That I can imagine anybody, even for anything, if you don't have to work for something, yeah, you're like, sure, give it to me. I want that.
Yeah.
Like, if you're willing to give something to somebody, they're willing to take it. So your brain is the same thing, which is you. So that makes so much sense.
Yeah. We're very, mechanically speaking, we're very simple. Our goals in life are to avoid pain and suffering. That's our
Right.
primary objective in life. And I would, I would take on anybody who would dare to challenge that. Our
Mm.
primary goal in life is to avoid pain and suffering. Nobody
Right.
likes that. We wake up every morning, we want to feel happy. We
Right.
essentially want to get high.
Mhm.
We are all drug seeking individuals. It's just how you go about it. And naturally, for short acting, small doses of dopamine is going to benefit the individual the most. Because it motivates that individual to engage in things that are pro-social and healthy, result in positive, peer and parental recognition. When I talk
Mhm.
about young people, hey, if you're engaging in sports and activities to get high naturally, you're going to end with an end result of a lower resting heart rate, better overall physical and skeletal health. So it's a win-win to
Right.
not be dependent on a substance that may have medical benefit. Now, at the same time, I don't want to, say that there is no warrant for
Mhm.
the use of medical marijuana. Absolutely, for individuals who have used it medicinally for things like chemotherapy and to treat the side effects of various medical treatments. Yeah, there's profound benefit. Um,
Right.
but again, this is symptom management. This isn't a fix. This isn't a cure. And so, what we see with most individuals who use it for chemotherapy, they use it for chemotherapy and then they cease its use.
Mm.
They use it for to get through that difficult period, right?
Right. Right.
Um, because just as you said, we don't know the true outcomes. And most cancer survivors are going to be, how do you say, more aware of
Mhm.
what they consume. Um, and and what we do know is that marijuana is linked to various cancers. One particular for males is testicular cancer.
Mm.
So you know, um, we're just the tip of the iceberg is just poking through the water right now for marijuana. The majority of the unknowns are still underwater, and that's for both adult use, recreational, as well as medicinal. I'm not opposed to using it medicinally. I would just like to see it more in a controlled, regulated, and we really need to just maybe pump the brakes a little and look at the medical, wait for some more data to come in.
Right.
Um, but
Yeah.
I'm
It's
not a
a it
medical doctor. I'm just a public health,
right,
professional.
right. But it's just common knowledge in the sense of wanting it to be tested more, wanting to know what the risk factors are and having that data. That's not unnormal when it comes to any drug. So why not? If you're going to use this as a drug to benefit you on different things, then you should know all your risk factors and know how that could impact your life in the future. Like you said, like it's going to take us 10 to 15 years before we really know what the outcomes are. And that's a lot, that's a generation in and of itself that can be affected by because of the use of it.
Yeah, yeah, it's a little scary when we really try to wrap
Yes.
our heads around it. And again, I'm not opposed to it. I just want to
Hmm.
know the harms
Right, exactly,
so that we
exactly.
can balance the risk and benefit. I mentioned the chemotherapy, but there's like three or four conditions that are like known for treatment, and that's one is the
Hmm.
chemotherapy. The other, I believe, is neuropathic pain, and that's really only looking at adults because throughout our adolescent years, our bodies are still developing our neural pathways, right?
Hmm.
And then multiple sclerosis also has some some data and some positive outcomes of use of marijuana. So with a few conditions, we have some of the risk and benefit, but then again, this is looking at symptom management, not
Right,
cure.
right.
And then we
And
also don't know what chronic use of a medication that is grown with herbicide and pesticides and fungicides, and quality control and allowances of these substances at certain levels. We don't know what the long term outcomes are. because again, there's no other drug that is dispensed this way. There are, FDA approved, cannabis derived medications, Dronabol and Cannabinol, which
Mhm.
are both, available prescription by doctors.
Mhm. Mhm.
Why those are not used more mainstream, um, I'm not quite sure, but I believe it has to do with what we call the entourage effect, where THC is not the only cannabinoid that is providing the perceived relief that individuals who use marijuana for various of these side effects. There's a lot of research going on right now, looking at seizure disorders, and these are like chronic seizure disorders where
Mhm.
young people are experiencing several hundred seizures a day, and cannabis flowering material or hash oil products are going to show a promise in this, right? Um, which I think if any of us have access to something that's going to improve the overall wellness for our children, we're probably going to look at. But again, we really need more research on it. We really need
Right.
more, long term before it's just this blanket cause. Just because it helps treat these, 3 or 4 known disorders does not mean it's a blanket, cure all for everything.
Right.
And we do know that it becomes counterproductive for anxiety disorders because that baseline of dopamine, marijuana kind of resets it. The more you use it, um, the more dopamine is depleted throughout the day. And when that person, um, their baseline becomes lower to where they will not recognize, the pleasure that's, naturally rewarded through conversation and academics and sports, because
Mhm.
their baseline has been reset at a lower level. And now they have to use a substance to bring their baseline back up. And if they're not using that substance, they're down here, and the conversations and the academics and the sports may not even break through their original baseline to where they engage in these activities and they're like, it just doesn't feel the same anymore. I'm losing interest. There's no reward for it. And that is what tolerance essentially is. People
Mhm.
gain tolerance from use and they cease to engage in their activities. And that's what you often hear. You mentioned focus and energy and everything.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and that's where a person sometimes will turn to marijuana to get that baseline back to where they can focus on what they're doing and they can, experience the perceived enjoyment when engaging in those activities that they once enjoyed. But unfortunately, it's not the activities that are providing that dopamine, it's the substance. And it takes a while, but the brain will eventually recognize that, oh, hey, it's not you playing basketball or sports or whatever that's giving you that dopamine. It's just the weed. And that person begins to do less and less and less of that activity until they lose interest in it. And that's unfortunate because that person loses something that they're passionate about, something that
Yeah.
defines them.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing with young people.
Definitely, because there is young people that I know who were passionate about different things, and then once they started using marijuana, they're they initially had no impact, but now they're not as engaged in those activities as they once were. And so you mentioned that that could be a very well the reason why it's not the same is because of the use. And I think that's what causes what is counter acting in the sense that it doesn't continue, like it doesn't keep you there. You need more and more to continue to keep that level. So that's when it becomes more of needing this product to get you there, and then it becomes overusing it, and then you're in a place that you don't want to be.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's our concern. We want to make sure that the priority populations are protected, and are giving the most meaningful uh, health recommendations and health information so that families and individuals can make the decisions with the knowledge that's provided to them. And perceived level of harm, unfortunately, is also something that is a driving factor of this. Perception of harm regarding marijuana, because the industry is so heavy on selling it as, this safe, benign substance. We're seeing young people have a very low perceived level of risk about it. And anytime the
Hmm.
perceived level of risk is low, use is high.
Right.
So, yeah,
So let me ask a question now. They're moving towards having legalizing marijuana.
yeah.
Is from a clinical standpoint, would that be beneficial to where they can do more studies on it once it's legalized? Or I'm not really a fan of it being legalized because I wonder about what the impact would be to the community. But from a research point, would that then make it more available for research and to really define what these risk factors are?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So, at the state level that it's currently at right now, adult use legalization, or as they call it, recreational use, um, it doesn't necessarily open up more research opportunities. There's already a significant increase in research
Okay.
being done on this. But we need more. We need more federally funded and federally,
Mm,
where we can get the big players and the big money into looking at longitudinal twin studies, and having large numbers of control groups and study groups, right? Um,
okay.
we can't do that until really it's federally rescheduled
Mhm.
into a drug that has medical use, because as it is Schedule 1, it has no known medical use, and it's
Okay.
still there. And it's in the same category as heroin and other hard drugs, which some say, it's unfair. I get it. And you can't, somebody who is dependent on marijuana is not likely to, engage in the same behaviors as somebody who is dependent on an opiate, because
Right.
the withdrawals are not going to be as severe.
Mhm.
The reason that individuals who have an opiate use disorder find themselves in some of these situations is because the withdrawals are quite unpleasant, from what I understand. Um, and that person just wants to rid themselves of that, so that they're doing things they normally wouldn't do in order to um, feel well, right? Where marijuana withdrawal, you just get a little grouchy, a little irritated. You might not engage in the activities that you once found fulfilling and passionate about, and that's about it, right? So that's
Mhm.
why we have such a low perceived level of harm about like it being like a hardcore drug. It's not a hardcore drug, but it can rip the very soul and definition out of young people, especially who are in the critical period between the ages of 12 and 21, who are learning what they're good at, what gives them pleasure, and making those neural connections, with relationships, and art and culture and sports and academics and all those things that we need, because right around 21 the brain hardens, right? So,
Mhm.
does legalization open up the research that's going to help protect the populations? Um, Only if it's done on a federal level.
Do you
Um,
see that even happening from a professional
I
level?
do.
Do you
I
do?
do. I do.
Okay.
But I don't see it in the next year or two. I think that's more on the 3 to 5 year plan. And that,
Okay.
again, is just my opinion. That's not
Mhm.
representative of, anybody else. And, opinions are kind of like doorknobs. Every door has
Yeah.
one. You know, um, you can take my opinion or you can pass it. I do a lot of research. I spend a lot of
Mhm.
time, reading, medical journals and peer reviewed studies. Um, and so that's where I get my data and my information from.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, I once it's federally rescheduled, what this is what my prediction is the all the claims for legalization at a state level right now, like taxes, jobs, a lot of the social justice, and inequity of equity in communities, right?
Mhm.
It's out the window, because once it's
Mhm.
federally decriminalized, That's where big tobacco and big alcohol step in, and they streamline it, and it becomes a non-compete. It literally, they nobody, you don't, do you see mom and pop cigarette stores where they are making a profit?
Right.
Not really. You see First Stop Tobacco and other places, and they're squeaking by. They might make
Hmm.
an okay living, but they're not employing people and paying them a high wage. They're employing people and paying them a minimum wage, because there's not a lot of markup on cigarettes. There's
Hmm.
very high taxes, um, and the cost of, say, tobacco and alcohol. You know, the cost to treat the damage done um, exceeds any tax that
Right.
the
Right.
alcohol and tobacco industry provides. That's why the federal government sued Big Tobacco in 1998 or 9, the Master Settlement Agreement.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and still, the funds that we get from that court settlement is not enough
No.
to even chip away at the damage done. And so that is my prediction for the marijuana industry, is once it's rescheduled, and once it's federally legal, and the banks can get involved at a high level, and everything is regulated, then yeah, it's, you're not going to see mom and pop, boutique marijuana dispensaries. It's going to become First Stop Tobacco and marijuana, and
Right.
you're going to be able to buy a pack of 20 Class A, hand rolls or joints, and they're going to be paying minimum wage jobs. The whole idea that this is a money grab, and, that's going to last long, is unfortunately, in my opinion, it doesn't play out in the long term. If we look at history with tobacco and alcohol industry, there's only very few individuals who are profiting on that. It's not the trickle down effect.
Right. Right.
Um, and I think if you talk to any restaurant owner or bar owner, they agree. Like, hey, it's not a get rich. It's a lot of work. It's very small margins, and so this whole idea that it's going to be the cure for financial success is, once it's federally rescheduled, we're gonna see a complete change in the way that the field looks. You know.
It's not encouraging at all. It really isn't. It's not
Oh, no.
encouraging.
No, it's not. And
Mm-mm.
when you add another substance that has the potential for misuse and abuse, and impacting the wellness of individuals and communities, it's a little scary. We already
Hmm.
have alcohol. We see that individuals who use alcohol, many can do so responsibly, but then we see individuals who have alcohol use disorders, and we see the
Right.
impacts that causes. Um, and unfortunately, the recreational model of marijuana mimics the alcohol model, where it's the 80/20 model. 20% of people who purchase recreational marijuana in states where it's legal, 20% of those individuals are the make up 80% of the marijuana industry's profits. And the reason is because those 20% of individuals are using at an abuse level, to where they're misusing that substance, where it's impacting their lives negatively. Where the other 80% of people might be able to use marijuana responsibly, right? Occasionally, with an adult formed brain. Um, but that does not apply. Responsible use of marijuana is a very slippery slope for the adolescent developing brain. It's something,
Hmm.
especially when we look at the purities, and the high THC content. But this generation is the past two generations, the past two groups of teens, they're essentially guinea pigs. There are lab rats that we're going to be seeing the outcomes in future years.
Ah, man, I just wish that that would come a little sooner than later. for
Yeah.
the because the whole thing, I still keep running through my mind about 10 to 15 years, 10 to 15 years, and knowing that it's just to me the impact that's going to be on our children and our children's children. It just to me it just is baffling. Like, and
Yeah.
we didn't even get into really the hash oil piece of it, but it's just not encouraging. And I wish that the government would take more serious action on this to prevent the downfalls from that could display about it. And like you said, from even women that go to these dispensaries and get it and they're pregnant
Yeah.
and it's affecting their children and then they don't really know the impact and they're believing it's safe because you're giving it to me. It's
Yeah.
just horrible. It's horrible. I don't know. It's, every
Yeah.
time I listen to you, you give me more information and I'm like, oh my God. It's just so I like to be informed and I like to understand and know. And I appreciate people like yourself who are out there educating people on the effects that any drug would have on your life and your family's life and how that can help even harm generations after you.
Yeah. It's, there's a lot of unknowns, and that's what we really are looking at right now. Is
Hmm.
just, that risk and benefit, and we don't know what the true risks are. So how can we gauge the benefits? And that's for both, recreational and medicinal. Hey, look, if you're an adult, if you're 21 and older and you want to use a legal substance, whether it's at a state level or federal level, that's up to you, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, my job, my goal is to educate and provide individuals with as much information that's proven, that's peer reviewed, that is, sometimes questions comes in forms of questions, and allow individuals to digest it and ask the questions to themselves. Is this something that I want to take the risk about?
Right.
Um, you know, it's coming, right?
Hmm.
We know that we're going to have adult use recreational marijuana here in PA in the next couple of years, and I wouldn't be surprised if within the next 5 years we have it at a federal level. So how are we going to, um, adapt accordingly? What
Right.
laws, what ordinances, what kind of both local and state and federal are we going to have for regulating a substance that can have a negative impact on somebody's
Right.
both physiological and psychological well-being. And that's really all we want to do in public health. Hey, we're not opposed to it. We just want all the information out there so that
Exactly.
everyone can make their best decision.
And that's what it's about, making an educated choice. Like you said, it's your choice if you're 21 and older to
Yeah.
indulge in this. However, you want to make an educated choice. You want to have all the information so that you know what you're doing. Like regular drugs, you can see what the risk factors are and make an educated decision if this drug is right for me, regardless of even what your medical professional says. You know your family history better than anyone. You know your body better than anyone. So when you get to look at the risk factors and weigh that from the risks from the benefit, then you're making an educated decision to whether or not you're going to take this step. And right now, there is no educated decision. You're really taking on, even if you're doing it from a dispensary, you're taking on a risk factor that you have no clue about. And are you really ready for the outcome that may come out of this? And I would say most people aren't because of the fact you don't know. So how can you be ready for it?
Yeah, well said. I think that says it all in a nutshell. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I definitely do appreciate having you here this evening. I really appreciate the knowledge that you shared and how you educated. And one thing I wanted to go back to too is that cancer piece. I wonder if men are really aware of the cancer risks, because most of them do not care to mess with anything in the lower region. So if you knew you could get tested, what is it called again? I want to say the proper word.
Testicular cancer.
testicular cancer. Would you really indulge?
Yeah,
That's my question.
yeah. You can, most people can Google it. Correlation between cannabis use and testicular cancer, and you'll see some, early. But
Right.
again, it is all early research because we don't have the longitudinal. Hey, would it be great if we could eliminate that risk with the knowledge, knowing that no, it's not accurate, that turned out it wasn't? No, we can't because we don't have the in-depth
Hmm.
research. We do know that it's correlated to it, that there's certain things that are linked to it. But this is the information that I think most people would want to know before they make the decision, and that's the parts that's missing. That's the
Right.
part that's missing, is knowing. So hopefully in another year or two, we'll have some more knowledge on this topic.
Yeah, hopefully. I really hope and pray that that would be the outcome because we definitely need it. So, again, I just want to thank you. Thank you for taking your time. I appreciate you. I appreciate the knowledge that you share. You have so much. And I wouldn't even mind having you back to talk about even the cigarettes, nicotine, and all of that because it's just I'm a knowledge person. I like to be well informed. And it's just like, yeah, you can research it and you can try to figure things out for your own. But when you have a professional, I mean, that's the same reason why we go to doctors, right? Because we want someone who's knowledgeable in a certain topic, a certain area when it comes to our bodies. And I appreciate you taking the time out to study and be a benefit to the community the way you are for teens and adults to really make an impact and making sure that people have awareness and at least some starting point of before you take a step or how to guide your children or your loved one, your partner, when they are using these items. So I do appreciate you. I'm so glad that I connected with you. I love listening to you. I listened to your last session as well at work, and I was just like blown away. I was telling my colleague who forgot to sign up, I was like, "Did you know?" And
Yeah.
she was like, "For real?" I was like, "Yes." So thank you so much. I don't know if you wanted to share anything about how people can connect with you, or even if someone's thinking of having you on their podcast to talk about these type of topics.
Yeah, probably the best way to get a hold of me is through, for this services would be through, my email. And it can either be my Yahoo email, davidfialko@yahoo.com, or through my work is dfialko at councilsepa.org, which is sepa.org. And those are going to be the two best. And again, we're just here to just to raise a little education and awareness. And I would love to come back talk about nicotine because we do have longitudinal studies. We have a lot of data on the outcome.
Yes, yes, yes. That's something you can really
Yeah,
hit home
you can
with.
really peel back the layers on that one.
Yes, yes. So thank you so much again. And remember, this is Let's Just Talk with Kim. I'm here every Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Make sure you share, make sure you like, and turn on those alerts so you don't miss a show. I appreciate all of you, and thank you very much for